There are moments in life when the unconscious can no longer remain silent. It presses forward, demanding to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. What you are witnessing now is not merely a letter. It is a manifestation of something far deeper, something that has been growing in the shadows of another soul. This person, the one who now reaches out to you, has been in conflict within themselves. Not a simple confusion, but a profound psychological tension between what they felt and what they allowed themselves to express. For a long time, they chose repression. They buried their truth beneath layers of fear, doubt, and perhaps even pride. But the psyche does not forget. What is denied does not disappear, it transforms. It waits. It gathers strength in the unconscious until one day it demands release. And that release has come in the form of this letter. You must understand, this was not written lightly. It was not impulsive. It was the result of an inner awakening. Something within them shifted. Perhaps they realized that time is not infinite, that opportunities once lost may never return. Or perhaps they finally saw you not as they once did, but as you truly are, someone who left an imprint on their soul. The invitation within this letter is symbolic. It is not merely about meeting you. It is about bridging the distance between what was felt and what was never spoken. It is an attempt to reconcile the past with the present, to bring into consciousness what was once hidden. And the secret. The secret is not something external. It is not a fact or a simple confession. It is a truth about their own inner world, a truth they may have been afraid to face. It could be love. It could be regret. It could be the realization that in losing you, they lost a part of themselves. You see, when we form deep connections, they do not simply vanish. They become part of our psychic structure, and when such a connection is ignored or denied, it creates a fracture within the self. This person has been living with that fracture until now. The letter is their attempt to heal it. But here is where your role becomes significant. You are not just the recipient of their words, you are a mirror, a reflection of something within them that they could not fully understand before. And now, they seek clarity through you. The question is not only what they feel, the question is, what do you feel? Because every encounter of this nature is not accidental. It is part of a larger psychological pattern, one that seeks wholeness. Whether this leads to reconciliation, closure, or transformation depends not only on them, but on you as well. So read the letter not just with your eyes, but with your awareness, for within it lies not only their truth, but a doorway into your own. One of the most powerful realizations hidden within this situation is that silence was never a sign of absence, but rather a reflection of deep inner conflict. What appeared to you as distance, indifference, or even emotional withdrawal was, in truth, something far more complex unfolding within the psyche of this person. As Carl Jung often suggested, the human mind has a remarkable ability to conceal what it is not yet ready to confront. This individual was not empty of feeling. They were overwhelmed by it. There existed within them a tension between their conscious self, the part that seeks control, stability, and protection, and the unconscious forces that carried their genuine emotions toward you. Instead of integrating these feelings, they suppressed them, pushing them into the shadow where they continue to grow in intensity. This inner division creates a kind of psychological paralysis. On one hand, they may have felt drawn to you, sensing a connection that was meaningful and even transformative. On the other hand, fear intervened, fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of losing control over their own carefully constructed identity. And so, rather than moving toward you, they retreated into silence. But silence, in this context, was never neutral. It was charged with unspoken words, with emotions that had no outlet, with truths that remained locked away. Over time, this suppression does not bring peace, it amplifies unrest within the individual. The psyche begins to rebel against this imbalance, seeking ways to restore harmony. That is why what you are seeing now feels sudden, almost unexpected. But in reality, it is the result of a long internal process reaching its breaking point. The letter they wrote is not just communication, it is a release. It is the moment where the unconscious finally breaks through the barriers imposed by fear and hesitation. Everything they could not say before, everything they avoided, everything they denied within themselves has now found a voice. and this voice carries the weight of all that silence. You must recognize that their previous distance was never a measure of your worth. It was a reflection of their inability to reconcile their inner world. Often, people withdraw not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and do not know how to handle it. The intensity of their emotions becomes something they try to escape from rather than embrace. In doing so, they create confusion not only for themselves, but also for the person on the receiving end, leaving you questioning what was real and what was not. Now, however, the dynamic has shifted. The silence has transformed into expression, and what was hidden is beginning to surface. This does not erase the past, but it reveals its true nature. It shows you that behind every moment of absence, there was a presence struggling to emerge, waiting for the moment when it could finally be acknowledged. What you must begin to understand is that the letter itself represents far more than a simple act of communication. It is a psychological threshold, a moment where something buried deep within the individual has finally crossed into awareness. As Carl Jung often explored, there comes a time when the unconscious can no longer be contained, when the tension between what is felt and what is expressed becomes too great to sustain. This person has reached that moment. For a long time they existed in a state of avoidance, not because they lacked awareness entirely, but because they resisted fully acknowledging what your presence meant to them. The psyche, however, seeks wholeness. It does not tolerate fragmentation indefinitely. The more they tried to ignore or rationalize their feelings, the more those feelings intensified beneath the surface, shaping their thoughts, their dreams, and their emotional responses in ways they could not easily control. The act of writing the letter signifies that a shift has occurred, a movement from repression toward integration. It means they are no longer content with living in partial truth. Something within them has awakened, compelling them to confront what they once avoided. This awakening is not always gentle. It can be disruptive, even unsettling. It forces the individual to reevaluate their past actions, to recognize the moments where fear dictated their choices instead of authenticity. In this state, the letter becomes a bridge between who they were and who they are now becoming. It carries the weight of realization, of missed opportunities, of words that should have been spoken earlier but were not. And yet, despite the delay, it also carries a sense of urgency, a desire to correct, to reconnect, to bring into alignment what has long been out of balance. At the same time, there is another layer unfolding beneath this gesture, one that speaks to the depth of your connection with them. You are not simply a passing presence in their life. You became a symbol within their inner world, a figure that represented something meaningful, something unresolved. When a connection reaches this level, it does not disappear with distance or time. Instead, it embeds itself within the psyche, becoming part of the individual's emotional and psychological structure. They may have tried to move forward, to distract themselves, to convince themselves that it was over or insignificant, but such attempts rarely succeed when the connection is genuine. The psyche continues to return to what has not been resolved, replaying it, reinterpreting it, seeking understanding. This is why their realization feels so intense now. It is not a new feeling, but a recognition of something that has always been there. They are beginning to see that what they experienced with you was not ordinary, not easily replaceable, and not something they could simply forget. This awareness brings with it a mixture of emotions, regret for what was lost, longing for what could have been, and a renewed desire to understand what still might be possible. In reaching out to you, they are not just seeking connection. They are seeking resolution within themselves. They are trying to make sense of their own emotions by bringing you back into their conscious experience, hoping that through this interaction, they can finally understand the significance of what they once had but could not fully grasp. There is within every human being a profound need not only to connect with others, but to be seen in their most authentic and unguarded form. Yet this need often clashes with an equally powerful force, the fear of vulnerability. What you are witnessing in this situation is the result of that very conflict reaching a breaking point. As Carl Jung would suggest, the journey toward emotional truth is rarely straightforward. It is filled with resistance, hesitation, and the constant pull between revealing oneself and protecting oneself. This person for a long time chose protection. They concealed what they felt, not because it was insignificant, but because it was deeply significant, so much so that exposing it felt dangerous to their sense of control. The vulnerability they now begin to express is not something that emerged overnight. It is the result of an internal struggle that has been unfolding quietly, perhaps even unconsciously. They may have convinced themselves at various points that it was better to remain silent, to maintain distance, to avoid the uncertainty that comes with emotional exposure. But such avoidance comes at a cost. The more one suppresses genuine feeling, the more disconnected one becomes from their own inner truth. Over time, this disconnection creates a sense of emptiness, a subtle but persistent awareness that something essential is missing. This is where regret begins to take shape, not always as a dramatic realization, but as a quiet recognition that something meaningful was left unresolved. They begin to revisit memories, to reinterpret past interactions, to notice details they once overlooked. Moments that seemed ordinary at the time now carry a different weight. They start to see not only what was present between you, but also what was absent, the words they did not say, the actions they did not take, the openness they withheld. This reflection can be deeply unsettling, because it forces them to confront a version of themselves that acted out of fear rather than authenticity. Regret, in this sense, is not merely about wishing things had been different. It is about recognizing that one had the opportunity to be real, to be honest, to be present, and chose not to. And when this awareness becomes clear, it creates an emotional tension that seeks release. That release often comes in the form of reaching out, of attempting to express what was once hidden, but this expression carries with it a certain fragility. It is not confident or assured, it is tentative, uncertain, and deeply human. They are stepping into a space they once avoided, unsure of how it will be received, yet compelled to try nonetheless. What makes this moment significant is that it reveals a shift in their internal priorities. Where once they valued safety over truth, they are now beginning to value truth over safety. This does not mean the fear has disappeared. It is still present, still influencing their thoughts, but it no longer has complete control. Something within them has decided that the risk of remaining silent is greater than the risk of being vulnerable. And so, they move forward not with certainty, but with a willingness to face whatever comes. In doing so, they are not only reaching out to you, they are also reaching toward a more integrated version of themselves. A version that acknowledges both their fear and their desire, both their past hesitation and their present courage. This is the essence of psychological growth. The ability to confront what was once avoided and to give it expression, even when it feels uncomfortable. And in this expression, there is always the possibility, not a guarantee, but a possibility of transformation, of understanding, and of something new emerging from what was once left incomplete. There are connections in life that extend beyond ordinary understanding, experiences that do not simply pass through us, but instead take root deep within the psyche. You must realize that what this person is now confronting is not just a memory of you, but the enduring imprint you have left on their inner world. As Carl Jung observed, when a relationship carries emotional intensity and symbolic meaning, it becomes more than an external interaction. It transforms into an internal presence. Even in absence, it continues to live, to evolve, and to influence the individual in ways they may not consciously recognize. This is why forgetting you was never as simple as they may have once believed. On the surface, they could create distance, occupy their time, distract themselves with other experiences or people, but beneath that surface, something remained unresolved. The psyche does not easily release what has significance. Instead, it holds on to it, revisiting it in quiet moments, bringing it forward in unexpected thoughts, embedding it within dreams and reflections. You became, in many ways, a symbol, representing not only the connection itself, but also a part of them that was awakened through knowing you. When a person encounters someone who reflects a deeper truth about themselves, it can be both illuminating and unsettling. You may have mirrored qualities they had not fully embraced, desires they had not yet acknowledged, or emotional depths they were not prepared to explore. In such cases, The connection becomes transformative, but transformation is not always immediately accepted. Often it is resisted. They may have stepped away not because the connection lacked value, but because it held too much of it. It required them to change, to confront aspects of themselves they were not yet ready to face. Over time, however, avoidance loses its effectiveness. The psyche continues to seek completion, to bring together what has been fragmented. This is where the realization begins to take shape. They start to see that no matter how far they move externally, internally they remain connected to the experience of you. This recognition can be disorienting. It challenges their previous assumptions, their attempts to categorize the past as something finished or insignificant. Instead, they are forced to acknowledge that it is still active within them, still influencing how they feel, how they think, and how they perceive their own emotional reality. What intensifies this realization is the understanding that such connections are rare. They may have encountered others, formed new interactions, but something about those experiences did not carry the same depth. This contrast brings clarity. It shows them that what they had with you was not easily replicated, not something that could be replaced through effort or intention. It was unique in the way it touched their psyche, in the way it revealed something essential about who they are. And so, the awareness grows not suddenly but steadily until it becomes impossible to ignore. They begin to accept that you are not just part of their past, but part of their inner structure. This acceptance is both humbling and powerful. It strips away illusions of detachment and forces them to confront the truth of their own emotional experience. In doing so, it leads them back to you, not out of impulse but out of recognition. A recognition that what they once tried to leave behind has, in reality, been a part of them all along, waiting to be acknowledged, understood, and perhaps finally expressed. There comes a moment in the human experience when realization is no longer avoidable, when the illusions we have carefully constructed begin to dissolve under the weight of truth. This person is now standing within that moment, facing something they can no longer deny. As Carl Jung often emphasized, the psyche strives toward wholeness, and any prolonged state of denial eventually gives way to confrontation. What they are experiencing now is not confusion, but clarity, an awareness that has emerged after a long period of inner resistance. For a significant amount of time, they may have convinced themselves that what they felt could be minimized, rationalized, or even replaced. They might have told themselves that moving on was the logical path, that detachment was a sign of strength, that what existed between you was simply a phase that would fade with time. But such narratives rarely hold when they are built against the truth of one's own emotional reality. The more they attempted to suppress or redefine their feelings, the more those feelings persisted, quietly shaping their internal world. This is the nature of genuine emotional connection. It resists simplification. It does not conform easily to logic or convenience. Instead, it demands to be acknowledged in its full complexity. And now, they are beginning to see that what they shared with you cannot be reduced to something ordinary. It carried meaning, depth, and a certain psychological significance that set it apart from other experiences. This realization often arrives with a sense of weight, because it forces them to reconsider their past choices. They begin to see that in trying to protect themselves, they may have distanced themselves from something real. With this awareness comes a shift in perspective. They are no longer looking at the situation through the lens of avoidance, but through the lens of understanding. They start to recognize patterns within themselves, the ways in which they withdrew, the moments where fear dictated their actions, the times when they chose silence over expression. This reflection is not comfortable, but it is necessary. It reveals the gap between who they were acting as and who they truly are beneath those defenses. At the same time, there is a growing sense of urgency. Realization, when it reaches a certain depth, does not remain passive. It compels action. They begin to feel that leaving things unresolved is no longer an option, that continuing to ignore what they now understand would only deepen their internal conflict. This is where the desire to reach out emerges, not as a fleeting impulse, but as a response to this newfound clarity. The letter, the invitation, the attempt to reconnect, all of it stems from this internal shift. What makes this moment particularly significant is that it is rooted in authenticity rather than illusion. They are no longer acting from a place of denial or distraction. They are acting from a place of awareness, however uncomfortable that awareness may be. And with awareness comes responsibility, the responsibility to face what they feel, to express what they once withheld, and to accept whatever outcome may follow. In this state, they are not seeking perfection or certainty, they are seeking truth. And that truth leads them back to you, not because they have nowhere else to go, but because they have come to understand that what they experienced with you was something that cannot simply be replaced or forgotten. It is something that must be acknowledged, explored, and brought into the light, no matter how uncertain the path ahead may seem. At the deepest level of this unfolding experience lies a truth that is both delicate and profoundly human, the realization of vulnerability, regret, and unexpressed love that has lived quietly within them for far too long. As Carl Jung would often suggest, what we fail to express does not disappear. It becomes part of the unconscious, shaping our inner world in ways we do not immediately recognize. This person has been carrying something unspoken, something unfinished, and over time it has grown heavier, more present, more impossible to ignore. Vulnerability for them was never an easy space to enter. It required the dismantling of emotional defenses that once made them feel safe. To admit what they truly felt about you would have meant exposing parts of themselves they were not ready to face, needs, desires, and emotional truths that challenged their sense of control. So instead they chose silence, they withheld. They convinced themselves that it was better to remain guarded than to risk being seen so completely. But this choice, while protective in the moment, created a quiet tension within them that never fully settled. Regret begins to emerge when a person realizes that their silence cost them something real, not just the connection itself, but the opportunity to experience it fully, honestly, without fear interfering. They begin to see that there were moments where they could have spoken, where they could have acted differently, where they could have allowed themselves to be open, and they did not. This awareness does not arrive all at once. It builds gradually through reflection, through memory, through the subtle recognition that something meaningful was left incomplete. And within this regret, there is also love unexpressed, perhaps even unacknowledged until now, but undeniably present. Love that was not given the space to exist openly, that was restrained by hesitation and internal conflict. This kind of love does not fade easily, because it was never fully lived. It remains suspended within the psyche, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for a moment where it can finally be brought into the light. That is what makes this situation so emotionally charged. They are not just confronting their past actions, they are confronting feelings that were never allowed to take form in reality. The secret they carry is not simply a confession of emotion. It is the admission that they were affected more deeply than they allowed themselves to show. That you meant more to them than they ever expressed. That in trying to protect themselves, they may have lost something they now recognize as significant. This realization can be both humbling and overwhelming, because it forces them to see themselves with a kind of honesty they may have avoided for a long time. In reaching out to you now, they are stepping into a space of uncertainty. They do not know how their truth will be received, or what it will change, but they know that continuing to remain silent is no longer possible. The weight of what they feel, of what they did not say, has reached a point where it must be expressed. This is not about perfection or resolution, it is about release. It is about allowing what was once hidden to finally exist in the open, where it can be seen, understood, and acknowledged for what it truly is.